नाटक रेडियो सुनने वाले सभी श्रोताओं को विकास दुर्गा का नमस्कार। पिछले एक साल से हर हफ्ते हम आपके लिए कुछ नई कहानियां, किस्से, नाटक और संगीत लेकर आ रहे हैं। What started off as a humble attempt to bring the feel of Hava Mahal on podcasts is now a global phenomenon. Natak Radio has been heard in over 65 different countries and more than 1,000 cities across the world. From Ghumarvi in Himachal Pradesh to Leicester in the UK, भारत की सिलिकॉन वैली बंगलुरु से अमेरिका की सिलिकॉन वैली सैन फ्रांसिस्को तक। हमारी पेरेंट कंपनी नाटक की ही तरह नाटक रेडियो भी एक ओपन प्लेटफॉर्म है। If you'd like to participate in Natak Radio, want to interact with us, would like to read or have us read a certain story or radio play, please write to us at radio@natak.org. That's radio@naatak.org. Until then, keep adding drama to your life with Natak Radio. This week on Natak Radio, presenting Gopinath Mohanty's The Somersault, performed by Kartic Bhargav.
The day Jaga Palei of Odisha defeated Ramlawan Pande of Bihar to enter the finals of the All India Wrestling competition, the sky was rent with jubilant shouts of thousands of spectators. It was not the victory of Jaga Palei that excited them so much. It was Odisha's victory. Odisha had won, and that was the feeling everywhere. At that moment, Jaga Palei became a symbol of the glory and the fulfillment of the hopes and aspirations of the Odia people. A sea of humanity surged forward to greet him, to meet the until now unknown, unheard of wrestler. The waves broke on each other, and there was a stampede, and at least 21 people had to be moved to the hospital. The crowd that returned home that evening included those who had their shirts torn, watches and fountain pens lost, and their bodies sore. But everybody carried in their heart the Odia national consciousness, and something more too. Let's call that the intoxication of heroism, as though each one of them was a Jaga Palei. Newspapers flashed photographs of that momentous wrestling match. All the Odia papers raved about Jaga Palei. Jaga Palei, Odisha's glory. Jaga Palei, Odisha's honor. The unparalleled Odia wrestler. The emperor of athletics, and so on. The week that followed could legitimately be called Jaga Palei week. In buses and trains, in hotels and in the village squares, the talk was only about Jaga Palei. This news completely overshadowed all other daily news, like the rocket to Mars, man's flight in space, death of Lumumba and the subsequent daily events of the Congo politics, and many other exciting changes in the world. Since there were no auspicious marriage dates in the upcoming year, hundreds of marriages were solemnized in the fortnight following this event, and in these festivities, a frequent subject of discussion was Jaga Palei's wrestling. Did you go see the wrestling? How did you like it? Even if one had not gone, one had to answer, "Oh, yes, of course. It was simply wonderful." It was almost as if admitting otherwise was worse than confessing to a hidden guilt. During that Jaga Palei week, a small 5-page songbook could be seen on sale in crowded places. Hawkers were seen trading the songbook in front of railway stations, bus stands, and big squares. Glass frame photographs of the wrestling event went up, not only on the walls of photographer studios, but also on sweetmeat and tea stalls, and at pawn shops in the town. Many famous institutions passed resolutions congratulating Jaga Palei and sent them to the press. Even though his name had become a byword everywhere, Jaga Palei of Sogodia Sahi still followed his traditional profession of carrying gunny bags in the Malgodam. He had done this job ever since he was 15, from the day his father Uddhava Palei had come home after returning the bullock carts of the moneylender, slept on the spread out end of his dhoti, and had never woken up again. Uddhava Pule had gotten an attack of pneumonia, and despite repeated attempts of exorcists to fend off evil spirits, prescriptions from the roadside quacks, and following the holy advice of monks, he died. He died without discovering whether mankind had discovered a cure for pneumonia. It was thus that Jaga Palei was left fatherless in this big city, with no jobs, nor savings, nor any help, in a 2-room thatched house with 3 guns of land, along with a widowed mother and 2 minor siblings, Kaga and a 12-year-old sister, Sara. The well-wishers arrived and offered advice. Sell the plot of land, build a small house elsewhere, and with the balance start some business. The argument appeared reasonable. The ancestral plot of land may have been in a congested locality of the town, but a little way down was the main road, where a gun sold at 700 rupees. With 2 rooms on it, it could fetch 3,000 rupees. Wouldn't it be so much cheaper to purchase a land and build a house in Tulsipur, Uttampur, or near the dairy farm? But Uddhava Pule had never sold that small plot of his ancestors, and nor would his wife and son, and hence this advice went unheeded. Another bit of advice from the same well-wishers was that the members of the household should take up service as domestic servants, or else who would maintain them? At 15, Jaga looked quite a man. Various offers came: a helping hand in driving bullock carts, operating machines in a sawmill, service in shops. A Babu suggested that he even do domestic service with the future prospect of a peon's post. Another person came and told him that Jaga was very fortunate as his sahib wanted him to be his personal valet. No work. Jaga only had to accompany him wherever he went, and there would be no end to the good food, tips, and a salary to cap it all. The sahib had done everything for the people who depended on him, and money was never a concern. Jaga was given the dream of sleeping on thick mattresses, wearing expensive clothes, and eating good food. Many would come seeking little favors through him. He would be a strong, stalwart person. Jaga listened to everything in silence. Something seemed to whisper from within, "Do not listen, Jaga. Close your eyes. Say no. No, you will not take to servanthood. However ferocious is a dog with a thick blanket of fur, a strong tail, and a huge body with large teeth, a dog remains a dog at its master's call. It may excite an onlooker, but it can only lick the master's boots and tie chain to a post." To 15-year-old Jaga, such thoughts came naturally, for in his blood was the tradition of endless ancestors, people who had tilled their soil and preserved an unbinding tensile dignity which 3 generations of town life had not corroded. Jaga turned his back on all the offers and persuasions to choose for himself the life of a daily wage earner, carrying loads every day. His mother did not object. With the help of her daughter, she opened a small snack shop in front of the house. She had a knack of preparing good and tasty food. Sales were brisk. And Kaga, his brother, went hawking groundnuts, and later he took a job rolling beedies in a factory. Somehow, the family of 4 members lived on, suffering hardships together. Nobody died, and the house was not sold. Jaga had one obsession in life: physical fitness. Early inspiration for this came from his father's godfather, the old Khalifa. Jaga remembered his mango complexion, the body of a young man, the flowing beard, and the green turban. Once he had tugged at Jaga's shoulder and asked him why he did not attend his akhada, his training arena. He had then asked Uddhava to hand Jaga over to him so that he could make a wrestler out of him. Uddhava had smiled and agreed, and that was the beginning. The Khalifa had no wife, no children, only a single pleasure in life: the akhada. Early in the morning, before the darkness lifted, Jaga would go to the akhada and do various types of exercises, including practice with the club, the lathi, and wrestling. Many young men joined and dropped out. but there wasn't a single day that Jaga Palei missed going to the Akhada. When wrestlers from other towns came, the Khalifa would arrange competitions. Jaga was unbeaten in these. The town people who cared for wrestling soon knew his name. They would praise his iron-like body, the lightning speed of his reflexes, and the marvelous tricks he had learnt from the Khalifa. But rarely were these people from amongst the higher circles of the society. Most of them were shopkeepers, tailors, butchers, or carpenters. This lack of fame and popularity was in part due to the Khalifa's regulations. No bragging, no publicity. After the big wrestling match that day, he found strangers crowding around him. Lights flooded on him from many directions and photos were taken. Then came a rain of questions. Questions, and more questions even before they could be answered. How long have you been in wrestling? Who's your guru? Ah, Omar Khalifa. Whom did you defeat earlier? Please give a list. What prizes did you win? What is your diet and in what quantities? Somebody from the crowd shouted, Do you agree that vegetable ghee is very conducive to good health? Ah, you've never taken that? More questions. How many cups of tea do you drink per day? What tea? You never take tea. Could you please tell us the truth, sir? Which party do you support? And all the time, more jostling and pushing about. Jaga felt suffocated. He stood in grim silence and then turned and ran away from the crowd. First, he went to his guru and fell at his feet. The Khalifa embraced him and said, Well done, son, you have preserved my name. Jaga hardly noticed the praise from other quarters. He knew that somebody always wins and somebody always loses. Just as in this contest, he had won and the other man was defeated. On his way back, he heard radios blaring forth the news of the match. And a little later, the newspaper vendors carrying bundles of newspaper were shouting the same news. His head was reeling. So instead of returning home directly, he went to the riverbank to be alone. Returning home late at night, he found an elaborate meal awaiting him. Rice, dal, mashed potatoes, fried brinjals and fish curry. His family members embraced and patted and praised him in their own way. Except a few neighbors, no one else came to look at him. He was relieved. The next morning, before dawn, he was back at his exercise and then the daily carrying of the bags. He did not say a word to anybody about his profession and his private life. Newspapers gave out the fact that he was a laborer. He was not aware how the news about him had spread, but the news of his achievements also circulated in that area of the Malgodam, and people would stop him on the way to congratulate him and ask him about his wrestling. They would tell him about his high place in the world of Indian wrestling and how he had raised the prestige of Odisha. For a bright future, all he had left to do was to win the finals of the All India Wrestling competition. Needless to say, there were lots of preparation advice. He must take fruits, mutton, milk, vitamins. He ought to be more careful. This flood of advice made him sigh wearily. His budget rarely permitted him more than a pound of chuda. A few days later, a large number of unemployed laborers came to town from the south. All they wanted was to earn some wages and somehow exist. So the wage rate went down. And then his younger brother Khaga met with an accident while returning home from the beedi factory. He had fractures and multiple injuries and was carried to the hospital. This added to the woes of the family and Jaga's daily worries. And yet, Jaga Palei persisted with his wrestling. His diet came down from half a pound to a quarter pound of chuda. He would fill his stomach with some rice and whatever green leafy vegetables were available. Hunger would burn fierce in his stomach. When there was no work, Jaga could be seen sitting in grim silence, lost in thought. He would feel lonely, friendless and forsaken. Everybody had forgotten him just a few days after the wrestling match. 3 months passed, and then came the fateful day of the finals of the All India Wrestling competition. Dalip Singh of Punjab versus Jaga Palei of Odisha. And when it was over, the newspapers flashed the report along with an analysis of the match. All agreed that the artistry and skill which Jaga had applied against the heavily built, massive Dalip Singh was superb, but the odds were stacked heavily against him. It appeared that Dalip Singh would fall flat, but ultimately he won. Dalip Singh's life sketch appeared in the papers. All the great men in the wrestling world were his patrons. There was also information about the variety and quantity of his diet, his present-day lifestyle and habits. And Jaga Palei was once again in the wilderness. Fresh discussions started in trains, buses and in crowded corners. Some people even expressed resentment against the man who had soiled Odisha's name. Many were unhappy and crestfallen. And soon even that was forgotten. But the day after the wrestling match, like any other day, Jaga Palei quietly went back to his exercise and the carrying of bags.